everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Governance Watch, a conference board webcast series that we produce in collaboration with the law firm of Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen & Hamilton. I'm Paul Washington, Executive Director of the ESG Center here at the Conference Board. The ESG Center focuses on helping companies navigate their evolving role in society by delivering trusted insights for what's ahead in the areas of corporate governance, sustainability, and citizenship. Today we're going to be discussing the upcoming 2021 proxy season. We'll be covering topics from the outlook for shareholder proposals and engagement, latest developments in virtual meetings, the impact of SEC rules and proxy advisory firm policies, and how you can get ready for specific proposals in key areas ranging from human capital to diversity, environment, and executive compensation. I'm really delighted to be joined by three experts in this field to help us have a conversation today. First, I'd like to welcome Rory Ross, who has got a terrific title. I'm envious. He is Global Head of Strategic Legal Matters, Corporate Development and Integration, and Assistant Corporate Secretary at HP Inc. Welcome, Rory. We also have Francesca Odell, a partner at Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen & Hamilton. Welcome, Francesca. And we have Mary Alcock, who is counsel at Cleary. So welcome, Mary. Glad to have you all here. Before we begin, we have some fascinating, deeply fascinating housekeeping matters to cover. So first, and this is important, you can download the background materials and a slide deck of today's presentation in the downloads section at the bottom of your screen. Cleary has produced an extraordinarily helpful deck that you will want to read as you prepare your nominating committee, your comp committee, your boards for the upcoming proxy season. It's terrific. But you can only access it if you're watching this program on a computer. You won't be able to download the materials from a smartphone or tablet. If you would like to receive the materials nonetheless, please fill out your name in the chat box and we'll send them to you after the webcast. Second, for those of you who haven't already filled up your CLE card for the year, we are offering New York State CLE credit for participating in today's live program. For CLE credit, you need to download the CLE verification and CLE evaluation forms posted in the download section at the bottom of your screen. Please complete the forms and email them to our friends at Cleary Gottlieb. For attorneys seeking credit outside of New York, please list your relevant bar information on the verification form, and we'll work with you to try to get CLE credit for those states as well. For those of you who want CPE credit, please click the link in the CEU request pod in the bottom right corner of the webcast console to sign up for this sort of credit. Please note that 3 pop-up messages will occur during the program to confirm your participation. You need to click OK each time you see one of those pop-up messages. As always, we really welcome audience participation. Some of the best questions come not from me, but from the audience. So please put them into the chat box, and we will get to them during the course of the webcast. If any topics we don't get to, we'll follow up after the webcast. Finally, a few other housekeeping notes. We'd ask that you complete the evaluation form at the end of this webcast. This is separate from the CLE evaluation form. It's an evaluation form that lets us know what you thought about this webcast today. It helps us improve. You can also share this program with your colleagues after the fact, as it should be available on demand in a couple days. You want to see more of us? You can enlarge the video to full screen view by clicking on the 4 arrows in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And I think, as we all know, for your best possible viewing experience, please close all your other apps. So stop your internet shopping and things like that, and just spend time with us if you would. So with all of those important housekeeping notes out of the way, let's get on with the discussion. So Francesca, let's look at the bigger picture for a moment. What are we hearing from the off-season engagements in general about what companies planning to do about 2020 voting results? What they're hearing from investors and talking to investors about relating to the impact of COVID and some of the other big topics that are top of mind. So what are we gathering from the off season, and what does that portend for the proxy season?
Sure. Sure. Thanks, and thanks to the conference board for having us, and to Rory for joining us as well. I think off-season engagement has been significant, and in a lot of ways it's kind of our menu or our outline for this discussion today on the 2021 outlook. In some ways, engagement during 2020 was easier, right? That it seems weird to say that anything was easier in 2020. But the remote nature of being able to engage maybe without traveling or without trying to figure out schedules when everyone could be in the same place meant that there was a lot more engagement, I think, and that engagement has become more intense year-round, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. I think in terms of how companies are looking at the past year, 2020 showed us a lot of things. There was a huge focus on COVID, obviously, but in many ways that was kind of a pathway to focus on ESG issues. At the very beginning, they fell by the wayside a little bit, but then I think that ramped up. So climate was a very significant focus, and I think we're going to talk about that based on the early results from 2021 and some of the statements we're hearing from institutional investors. I think that'll continue to be important. And then there was a huge amount of engagement around human capital and diversity. And so I think that kind of what was the highlights of the 2020 season are really carrying into the 2021 season, and the way that companies have been engaging with investors about those topics, I think, is going to continue into this coming season, really, and drive the agenda.
That's really helpful, because there isn't as strong of a connection between the off season and what you see. Sometimes the proxy season depends on what happened in the last proxy season, not as much as what happened in engagement. But given the dynamics of this year, a lot of what was been talked about in the autumn is really what's setting the agenda for the spring season. So Rory, you've been doing engagement for a while. What's your view of off-season engagement in general? And you've also been very successful in engaging with your investors both off-season and during the proxy season. I wonder if you have some suggestions for people.
Sure, thanks, Paul. And thanks for having me. Governance roadshows, I don't think there's a better way to communicate with and listen to your shareholders in a focused fashion. And especially in this weird virtual COVID way, I think, the point's correct. One thing has been connectivity has been easier, so no travel, but there's so many issues swirling around as we enter into the 2021 proxy season and the seeming resurgence in activism, that it really does pay a lot of, it's well worth spending the time to get the pulse of your own investor base. Cleary's deck is great. Definitely download it, definitely keep it. It does present the issues at the general wholesale level, but not all issues are the same for every company. And so, it's kind of like politics. The investor engagement should focus on the retail. What's about you? What are your investor base thinking about themselves generally, but you specifically? And the conversation allows you to engage with them about kind of their priorities, what's new, especially in this world where social equality has become one of the key topics, and expectations of boards is very much kind of up for discussion at a level that's kind of an intensity that's kind of greater than usual. And I find it really, one of the issues I think most people in house have is how to advise boards on how to deal with ESG. It's an alphabet soup. It's loosely defined. Everyone's got different views, but you can actually have a dialogue with your investors that begins the concept of understanding from them what's material important to them about you, your company, and its long-term success, and how it deals with stakeholders. And you can also start dialoguing about what the appropriate metrics are to show progress, and you can add that to your knowledge base. As to how to do it, getting key directors to attend is like catnip to felines here. Basically, that's the headline. None of us on this call as governance professionals are the headline attraction. If you can get your directors, certainly, we get our chair, the head of HRC, Human Relations and Compensation Committee, and one of the people from our NomGov, the next external counsel of DuPont, to attend with us. That really does go a long way to make them say yes, the investors say yes. And if they don't say yes, just usually it's because they've got nothing to say to you or they like your story. But you can always check in with them as well, just to kind of make sure by email there's nothing under the surface.
Yeah, that's great. So it's two great points about sort of cutting through the clutter. One is in this alphabet soup of 100 or more ESG issues, these engagements can really help focus on the ones that really matter, help you hear from your investors what really matters to them, and help you focus your board on, therefore, what matters. And then it's also a great way, listing your directors in engagement, whether off or during the season, is a great way to cut through the clutter and actually get a chance to engage with your investors. So great points. Let me ask you about virtual shareholder meetings, Rory. Last year there was this amazing pivot that companies did to, like, in the last minute, sometimes changing New York. It was crazy times in 2020. One thing that certainly wasn't easier in 2020, engagement might have been easier. Shareholder meetings were, for many companies, it's just a nightmare getting ready for it. So in many ways, a successful pivot, but still there were some reservations that investors had about the experience in 2020. So curious, you've been doing virtual shareholder meetings for a while. Your perspectives on what makes for a successful virtual shareholder meeting, and anything that you may be thinking about doing differently in the coming year.
Sure. I mean, like you say, we've been doing virtual only since 2015. And in part, it's because we're a tech company. And, we have a commitment to online technology. And we also have an investor base that, A, trends towards the technology savvy driven, and B, is global. And so, our directors are now the biggest proponents of virtual meetings. I mean, and part of that is because they believe it gives better overall participation rights for a large proportion of this global stockholder base, not just the ones who can come to Palo Alto, where our headquarters is. And again, other companies can see it differently, but that's our context, right? And our investor base, institutional, zero pushback. Retail, as far as we can tell, on voting trends, little if any discernible pushback. You absolutely do get a couple of the, I'm not quite sure what the phrase is, corporate activists who are focused on this. The individual stockholder proponents, and we all know, I think, who they are. But that's the limit of the input to us as we kind of seek to come to the conclusion as to what works best in our context for our stockholder base. In terms of, and again, other corporations' contexts may be very different. But in terms of kind of our general thoughts and why both investors and the proxy advisors, I mean, we talk to ISS and Glass Lewis, and because we were one of the first, we've been talking to now for almost 6 years to them. The focus has to be on this fairness. It has to be going the extra mile to allow all stockholders to participate on this equal footing. And I think what that involves is really clear disclosure about how this is going to be set up and how they participate, make it as easy and clickable as possible, back up by really good execution of the technology. Not just the access, but the authentication, online tools to enhance the efficiency of the meeting itself, especially around Q&A. I mean, Q&A is going to be the hot spot, right? Because everyone wants to make sure they get the chance to make their questions asked. And quite often, I think most of it has been through live virtual meetings where certain individuals have got a particular point of view that they want to drive through come what may, so not necessarily the benefit of the full picture. So you do have the ability to prioritize important questions, eliminate duplicative ones, so long as you commit, and I think you have to make this commitment, to answering every single question posed and posting the answers either online or doing some version of that on general access. And then, as we talked about, just keep on talking to your large investors to make sure that they don't see something you're not seeing, and keep on talking to the proxy advisors, and specifically, I think Glass Lewis are, we'll talk about this in a second, Glass Lewis has been very helpful. What do they think about your disclosure and your proxy? Do they think it's adequate?
Mm-hmm. Great. That's really helpful. Francesca, anything, I think those are terrific points. Anything you'd like to add on what you're seeing companies are focusing on doing a bit differently?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I couldn't agree more with Rory. I think that there was, we spent a huge amount of time advising companies from, I guess, March to May about how to do this well, and really the guide as to how to do it well was look at the companies that have been doing this for years and what do they incorporate into their process and how do they handle it with shareholders. I think this year at least there's a realization that it's going to happen again. So there's not going to be all of that scrambling that happened last proxy season, and I think that was stressful and led to potentially some of the hiccups. Those were few and far between, I think, and pretty anecdotal. But I do think part of that was caused by the fact that companies had very little time to prepare, and now they'll have more time, right? So I think for companies that didn't have experience and the expertise like Rory has had, I think now they have one under their belt, and so it's a little bit easier to plan. I think the service providers have also stepped it up, and there are more of them now. So I think some of those issues will not present themselves again. I don't think there'll be a huge sea change in terms of what we'll see for virtual meetings this season. I do think we'll see the type of focus that Rory mentioned, and probably an increased use of video. I know there was mixed practice last year, in part because of the timing, but I think probably video will be preferred over the telephonic meetings. And I think, too, in particular, just an adaptation of how companies are dealing with that Q&A, right? How creatively they're handling that, how they're going to manage questions that are similar, but making sure that they're conveying to stakeholders that they are addressing those questions. And I think there will still be some noise around it, right, which is evidenced by the amount of real estate taken up in some of those shareholder proposals that have nothing to do about virtual meetings but seem to have a nice page rant on them. I think, though, that, it will become more commonplace, and you can see that, right, in the ISS and Glass Lewis guidelines that they've certainly taken the approach of focusing more on disclosure as opposed to over-focusing on, kind of potential downsides. So I don't think there should be a huge shift. We do have this weird thing going on in state law that we need to make sure kind of keeps getting fixed, right? If you're a New York corporation, it's kind of stressful to know that you're relying on an emergency order to be able to hold your meeting virtually. So I think there may still be some kind of nervousness around that, but at least for now, New York has pulled out quite some time, and my guess is that other jurisdictions are going to make sure that they're following suit so that we don't have that kind of lack of clarity.
So that's really helpful. So you mentioned shareholder proposals on virtual meetings. So Mary, let's bring you into this conversation. A big question that companies would be interested in hearing an answer of is because some companies don't get a lot of shareholder proposals, but they still need to know what's happening in the landscape. So this is relevant for those who have already received their proposals, which is probably most companies year-end cycle. But for even those companies who aren't getting a lot of proposals, what are we seeing in terms of the types of shareholder proposals that are coming in for voting on in the upcoming season?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I think no one will be surprised at the shareholder proposals that have been coming in so far, nor will they be surprised at who they are coming from. The only real surprise I have had so far this season is the incorporation of graphic thumbs up in Chevedden's shareholder proposals. So if you haven't gotten one yet, wait for it. So I think, as I said, no one will be surprised. It's in addition to the usual governance, we're seeing the fix-it proposals for proxy access, we're lowering the percentage for written consent and special meetings. The more interesting ones are following, frankly, the same topics as the engagement that Francesca was talking about. Boards, who's on the boards, diversity on the boards. And it's broadening just, from gender to, ethnic to employees. There's been a number of proposals basically asking that the board implement a Rooney rule, if you will, with the inclusion of employees in order to get the employee, representation of thoughts and views on the company onto the board. And there's also been some proposals pushing ideology, which is a little tenuous. But if you read the proposal, you can usually figure out at least which way they're trying to push the board, left or right. So all of that will be out there. I think there will be a climate. The Paris Agreement, I think, will certainly be popping up on a lot of companies' radars. Political contribution, charitable. So So I think a continuation of what we've seen last year. I think the one thing that might be different this year, obviously a little bit more heightened on the human capital management. I think that phrase is certainly going to be coming up. It's going to be coming up in a lot of different ways, though. So as Rory was saying, ESG is not monolithic. And the most interesting proposals, frankly, are the ones that are really very specific to the company. Be it on, opiates, be it on advertising, be it on deforestation. But the last thing I'll say is, and I have a special interest, is on the compensation side. There are the usual sort of CEOs should be paid less, but there's also a recognition that given the pandemic, that a lot of companies made adjustments or are contemplating making adjustments to their bonus outlines and criteria. And I've already started seeing some shareholder proposals popping up saying, please don't give bonuses based on a performance period of less than a year. And that's directly aimed at the folks who basically said, you know what, 2020 is, we're going to lower our performance goals, or we're going to shorten our period, or we're going to lengthen our period and look back to the good old days. So I would be on the lookout for those as well.
Yeah, real focus on moving those goalposts. So let me.
And I would be remiss, I'm sorry, Paul, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the New York City controllers. They've already come out of the gate, 24 proposals to S&P 100 companies on disclosure of EEO1s. No surprise there.
And in terms of the balance between governance proposals and the sort of E&S proposals, how do you see that playing out this year? A lot of the more interesting ones are obviously on the sort of E&S side, or they've got the E&S aspect relating to governance. But how do you see it in terms of the number and the volume of these?
For all the emphasis on ESG and maybe it's because of the increased engagement, or maybe because it's just easier to crank out the governance proposals, asking for independent chair or, proxy access for less than 20 shareholders. I actually think that governance is still going to dominate on sheer numbers. But I think as far as interest and the public interest, if you will, it's going to be focused on those ES proposals more.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to bring that up because I think that's important for folks to keep in mind, that the governance proposal machine continues. Sometimes it's a way to get in the door and have a conversation about other issues relating to environmental and social issues, but that's still a vital part of the season for folks. Quick question from people watching, from Sarah who's watching. Pre-recorded annual shareholders meetings. Francesca, do you have thoughts about how those will go over?
So I think we've seen folks pre-record limited portions of meetings sometimes, right? When there are either important issues or when someone, honestly, when they're concerned about connectivity type issues, things like that. I think pre-recording larger chunks than that, you run the risk of potentially having folks complain that there wasn't an interactive element to that. And when you go back to what Rory was saying about where the proxy advisory firms are focusing and where a lot of the maybe louder investors might be focusing, I think that is a little bit risky. So the blended approach, to me, I think you can kind of rationalize why that might make sense. And so you just have to be careful that there's some kind of interplay, I think, opportunity.
And the only add to that is, we'll see, and fingers crossed this year won't be like last year, but we did ours in the middle of a Bay Area county lockdown. And so we had to rely on the HP team did a fantastic job, but they had to rely on individuals doing a little bit more pre-recording than usual. So I do think that COVID may fingers crossed the vaccines will all have really got their way to the system by the time most of the folks on the call have their meetings. But for those going earlier, we may still be in lockdown.
Yeah. Okay, really helpful. Got another question we'll get to in a little bit. But let's turn to the topic of proxy advisory firm policies and updates. Francesca, you want to give a perspective on what's happened and what it means?
Sure. Everyone's favorite topic. So both ISS and Glass Lewis have come out with their 2021 voting guidelines. I think the virtual meeting aspect, which is always a chunk of those guidelines, I think I won't spend a lot of time on because we've talked about that a little bit, and I think it's consistent with what we were all kind of thinking would come out in terms of a disclosure focus. The diversity angle, I think, is very important. We go into a lot of detail on this in the deck, so I'll just kind of highlight it at a high level. But both ISS and Glass Lewis have policies to vote against the chair of the Nom and Gov committee if certain kind of goals aren't met. For ISS, it's when there is no woman on the board, and by 2022, where the board doesn't have apparent racially or ethnically diverse members. I think Glass Lewis, it's when there are fewer than 2 female members by 2022. And so there is going to be a huge focus on diversity, in particular at the board level by the proxy advisory firms. And I don't think that's a surprise. And it's also consistent with kind of what we're hearing from institutional investors, honestly. And so that's an area to watch. There also have described a lot of other aspects, diversity and social justice related aspects, so things like understanding for following state law, but also an openness for potentially voicing opinions when there are state laws in places like California and some of the other states that have mandated certain diversity targets on boards at different intervals. I think the proxy advisory firms are going to be looking at that as well. And Mary mentioned the EEO1 reporting. Glass Lewis in particular specifically said that they are supportive of that disclosure. So a lot going on in diversity. I think that will also develop potentially over the 2021 season, so it's something to watch closely. On climate and sustainability, maybe I'll just mention that because I think that's the other area where we all watch kind of closely what the changes in the voting guidelines are. They are both particularly focused on oversight. That's always been a focus, as well as disclosure of the level of board oversight. So there's also actual disclosure of objectives in the climate and sustainability area, and we're going to get to climate in a few minutes, hopefully. But I think that the overriding focus has really been on that oversight aspect. And if you look at some of the very early activity in the 2021 season, I think you'll see that that's exactly where they're directing their attention. And so, things like shareholder proposals, requesting enhanced disclosure, evidence of board oversight, those are all the types of proposals where I think you'll see them very quickly and early getting behind those kinds of proposals.
Picking up on one of your points there, Francesca, is especially with diversity, but also in climate, it's not like the proxy advisory firms are way out ahead of investors, right? We had a session where we heard from investors representing 12 trillion in assets in the autumn, put out a report based on that discussion. They're acutely focused on board diversity, and they indicated to us that they're going to move faster in voting, both in engagement and voting against board, if they don't see progress on diversity. They're expecting not just, apparent diversity, they're expecting disclosures on ethnic diversity on your board. So it's an interesting dynamic. Historically, sometimes the advisory firms were sort of leading the charge. It's not really happening in these areas as much, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really interesting. I think the institutional investors always come out with lots of statements, right? We all wait for Fink's letter at the beginning of the year and read what it's going to say. I think the difference over the past year, and I think that we'll see this going into 2021, is that some of them are starting to act on that a little bit more, right? And that's a shift. It was, I think, we used to view those as aspirational and as guiding tools for companies. But when the voting starts to shift and when you see potential there, I think that then there is the potential for those institutional investors to drive the process more. And honestly, the proxy advisory firms are important for those folks who don't have, the type of engagement and resources within their houses, right, to be doing all that research. But the large institutional investors have that in spades, and so they don't have that same need to rely, I think, on that research and background.
Investor statements are not just aspirational, they're consequential now. It used to be that the sort of, the teeth came with the proxy advisory firms, but it's coming from both sides. So in light of that, Rory, any comments about how you view engaging with proxy advisory firms these days? Oh, Rory, you may be on mute.
Thank you. That's what probably Lions 2020. You may be on mute.
Yeah.
We always invite both the ISS and Glass Lewis as part of the outreach. I will tell you, we find Glass Lewis generally accepts, and we have really quite fruitful conversations with them. ISS not so much. I'm not sure I can discern a pattern. Obviously, they'll attend if they want to talk to you, and they'll also attend some years where you think, well, there really wasn't anything they want to talk to about, but they just attended. So in terms of the annual outreach, don't be offended if ISS don't say yes to your invitation. As usual, I think on issue-specific matters, for example, we had a written consent proposal a couple of years back. Both were super helpful and super responsive to being engaged, to talk us through kind of what their expectations were. I mean, you listen and you're able to kind of to talk to them as well as about kind of how you're responding. So, like I say, we always invite. But don't get offended if ISS don't talk to you.
Right. Just a quick question: do you invite your directors to those sessions with Glass Lewis? Okay, so that also can.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, we're with Glass Lewis, the San Francisco office. It's generally we do those in person. ISS is usually a phone call for us. Again, from their choice, would go if they wished us to, but no, directors are absolutely present in those conversations. And again, they're one of the lead attractions.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll take a pause here for just a moment for the CLE verification code, which is 12366. That's 12366. So now let's take a moment and talk a little bit. We talked about the informal regulators, the proxy advisor firms, so let's talk about formal regulation. Mary, impact of latest SEC rules, some of which aren't actually in effect yet. Are they having much impact on the proxy season, do you think? And just generally, too, stepping back, I know people are curious, what do you see happening in the Biden administration when it comes to matters of governance and particularly relating to shareholder voting and shareholder proposals?
Well, that's a pretty quick and easy couple of questions to answer.
Yeah, no, sorry, we got 2 minutes.
Well, actually, one of the questions has a pretty short answer, I think. With one exception, I think the new rules on both the regulation of the proxy advisory firms and on shareholder proposals will have 0 effect on this year. Obviously, they're not in effect, and they're really, other than maybe, certain smaller investors hunkering down and buying shares so that, when the time comes, they go into effect, they'll have held them for 3 years. That might be going on. But I think in sort of the natural process of both the proposals and, interaction with the proxy advisory firms, I don't think they're going to, I don't think they matter. Although I will say that the S&P 500 are not happy about the fact that they are not getting a free copy of their ISS report this year. Whether that was directly related to the rule or not, I'm not sure, but that is the one thing I have heard. To be honest, I'm going to go out on a limb because I don't who really knows. But my guess is that the new administration will not tackle these first out of the box. I think there's going to be other things they're focused on. I think my guess is that they will dust off the regulations under Dodd-Frank that never quite made it all the way there. You know, clawback, pay for performance. I think they'll be focusing a lot on sort of the HCM disclosure. That I could see them, you know, going after, trying to tighten it up, make it a little more meaty and less up to the, you know, up to the companies to, you know, sort of, you know, spin whatever. I don't mean spin in a bad way. I mean present whatever story that is that they're presenting. As far as whether I think they'll be pulled back, no. Will they be pushed further? I could see the proxy solicitation, I keep saying that, proxy advisory firms, that I could see being just left alone, to be honest. Because unless you're really going to take on regulating them in any serious way, which, you know, is, you know, one step into the quagmire, I think, you know, they've sort of put some parameters about it, and you know, and I don't see them wasting a lot of time on that. On the shareholder proposals, other than the, you know, the uptick in the amounts, which frankly I don't think anybody really thought was crazy to raise the 2001 year. Just, I mean, inflation if nothing else. The one thing I do wonder a little about is the resubmission thresholds. Those were, you know, jumped in a way that frankly would put paid to most of the resubmissions. So that I could maybe see being tinkered with, but I don't think they're going to be first out of the box on this. If I had to guess on the proxy world and what the Biden administration might go after first, it could well be the universal proxy. You know, that had gained traction, you know, even, you know, just with the SEC the way it is now, and I can't see Biden or, you know, Biden's SEC chair really wanting to put the brakes on that, because if anything, it makes it easier on investors, and you know, makes it easier for, you know, companies and, you know, entrenched boards to be challenged.
Got it. And any thoughts on proxy plumbing? It's a question coming in from one of our viewers. That's been out there for a long time. That's certainly not first out of the gate.
Not first out of the gate. Not at all. You know, in a funny way, I think the time for that has sort of come and gone in a way, because the technology has gotten such that, you know, all the brokers having to, you know, get the proxies and mail them out and, you know, get the cards back and all of that, you know, it really did make a big difference that that the companies couldn't go direct to, you know, their retail or even institutional investors. But with the technology now, everything's posted, and, you know, voters can basically go on the websites and, you know, and vote, you know, sort of irrespective of having to go through their brokers. So to my mind, and again, I welcome anyone to challenge me on this, I don't think that'll be a big focus, certainly right off the box.
Okay, well, we may delve deeper into that in a future webcast. So right now, but thanks, that's really helpful. So let's turn to some of the key topics, and we're going to go through this a little quickly. But let's talk about diversity, which can come up in so many ways. It can come up through engagement, can come up with disclosure, it can come up with shareholder proposals on board and management diversity. It can come up on things like overboarding and so forth. And it's not just gender, but other. So, Rory, getting ready for the increased focus on diversity, suggestions on what companies should be doing to prepare their boards and management for this.
I learned my mute button. I think
you did.
You did really well.
Learning session, everyone.
Yeah, you did it really well. This is investor driven, and it's not just aspirational; it's also consequential. And so, you know, I think if your boards haven't your boards and your management have not yet identified gender, racial, ethnic diversity issues at both the board and workforce level as a material and important issue to both your company's values and value creation ability, they need to, because it's coming. It's a train that's kind of on. I don't think it's going to stop. I don't think it was, just 1 year. I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation that, like you say, is going to have consequences. And so, get them to identify, have the conversation. Hopefully, they're there already. Assuming they're there already, then you need to work out where the issues live in your corporate governance structure, including the roles of committees and the full board and the oversight, the goal setting, compensation, setting progress against goals, and then work out the appropriate level of your disclosure and details for both workforce diversity, your board and racial and ethnic makeup, and your board and management practices, including how the board does all the things I just mentioned. That should give you the data and the backbone, if you will, of what your company's narrative and point of view can be. And you can work out then how best to articulate that. The one thing I'd really emphasize, don't oversell. I mean, if you oversell where your company either is or where it truly is, how it's truly behaving, then you're going to get hit by this actions, not words, and don't talk the talk if not prepared to walk the walk. And I think companies who are perceived not to be doing that are the first targets.
Right. No, that's incredibly helpful. And frankly, what we've also heard is if you've got a problem, subject to all those concerns about litigation, but identify it as an area that you're focusing on. It's better because someone else is going to do a social media post on it if you don't. So better for you to sort of say, we recognize this, and it's in finance or in whatever area where we want to do better in diversity, you can flag it for yourself. Francesca, any thoughts you'd like to offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rory framed it really well in thinking about kind of framing the issues and then thinking about results, right? If you look at the push for gender diversity that happened over the past, 5 to 10 years, it actually drove results, right? If you look at back in 2009, I think it was, 17% of S&P board seats were filled by women, and you look 10 years later after a number of the very clear messages that those companies got about gender diversity, and 46% of those seats are now filled by women. The same has not happened so far for ethnic and racially underrepresented groups, and I think that this push is certainly a push to have those kinds of results, and stakeholders are learning that from a combination of shareholder proposals, state laws, and other actions, they can drive that change. And so I think listening to that change and engaging on it is very important. And companies that don't, Rory's exactly right. It's not going to go away, and addressing it front on and working with those stakeholders to try to figure out the right type of approach, I think, is very important. The risk of overstating is much more significant than it used to be. If you look at some of the recently filed lawsuits over the last 6 months, there have been a number of them in California, and that's now growing to other jurisdictions as well, where shareholders are making claims either using books and records or using other approaches to make claims that companies are making stronger statements about diversity than they may be able to stand behind, and that in practice that's not coming through. And so who knows? I think there are a lot of challenges to some of those suits, and I'm not sure whether that's the right forum to be dealing with this issue, but I do think it opens companies up to exposure, and that's very important. The last thing I just mentioned is I think that we may see other stakeholders jumping in the ring like NASDAQ did last week, right? I think when they came out, and obviously the SEC has to approve this, but when they came out with listing requirements about diversity on boards, I think that's a pretty novel proposal on diversity, and we hadn't seen that type of approach before. And look, fine, the penalty would not be delisting, but I got to say that disclosure, explaining why you can't achieve that, is going to be tough disclosure to swallow. So if the trend continues that way, which I think we think it will, it's going to continue to be a very important source of engagement and proposals over the coming season.
Great, yeah, and we could all do a whole session also as well on what might be happening with listing standards, and do we move a little bit more to a UK version of comply or disclose, comply or explain kind of thing in the whole ESG arena, because there's fertile ground to be plowed there potentially. We'll see. Under the heading, we've talked about diversity. Now, human capital is obviously related to that, but human capital is just like diversity is broader than your workforce. Human capital is broader than diversity because it covers areas such as culture and compliance, employee health and safety, and so forth. And we've entered this brave new world. We've got a report coming out from the conference board later this year. We're planning to on human capital management and disclosure. But Rory, you've been going through this area, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how you see the 10K disclosure fitting in with what you put in your proxy statement, putting it with what you put in other disclosure documents or reporting documents, CSR reports. How do you figure out what goes into your 10K? How are you viewing it this year?
The good news for me is there is a small but fantastic HP team who gives me the answers. The new 10K disclosure requirements November 9th. We're one of the first to file after that because we're just lucky that way. My hats off went to like a tiny but great team on the HP legal side who basically sat down, looked at disclosure requirements, looked at kind of, like you just said, I mean, it's all part of the fabric of our overall disclosure portfolio, which K is there, worked with our controllership and came up with kind of a 2-page human resource capital section in the K that, does what we're asked to do, focus on development, attraction, and retention of employees by not just diversity and equity, but also pay equity, employee engagement, training and development, health, safety, and wellness. I mean, they're all out there on the 2 pages if you want to go and look. And, one of the interesting dynamics is we'll see how this evolves over the course of, the next year or so. I mean, we were one of the first. And I do think that what we did was seek to have clarity and consistency in terms of the statements. And again, back to what we said before, we don't oversell. This is all part of those metrics. And, we'll see how it evolves. We'll see what the reaction is. We'll see. We had a lot of conflict about kind of where do you put aspirational stuff. Do you put that in the K or do you put that into the proxy or somewhere else? And so, the conversations you'll have about that. But, I'll be, having done ours and ours being out there for folks to read, I'll be really interested to read others. And one more time, a big call out to the HP team who took this on and did a great job.
Right. And an important piece of advice implicitly there is actually have a team working on this and have a strong team focusing on this. This isn't something you delegate down to someone who's got no exposure to or limited exposure to the board or something. You actually have to have someone who knows what the company is doing in this area, has a sense of what are the material issues, right? And so this requires resourcing it internally to do this right, no matter how much you put in the K, or else you need to deploy sufficient.
Yeah, you don't want to slip. And thank you for calling it out. That's exactly what I was trying to make.
Yeah, yeah. And Mary, any thoughts on this area? And you are actually we're taking turns on mute here.
And I promised myself I would be so good about it too.
We all in so many ways, and I'm going to go out and exercise later. Go on.
I think that I think that what goes into the proxy statement is not going to change very much based on the new HCM disclosure in the 10Ks. I think they always were, inherently are sort of different documents. I would say it's crucial to make sure, and as Rory said, that everything matches up. That what's on your website, what's in your K, what's in your proxy, all has a consistent message. And the one word of advice I guess I would give folks on their proxy statement disclosure is that not to get too puffy because I think you're absolutely right. You don't want to overpromise, but you also don't want to be accused of trying to cover up the real issues by, sort of, putting in stuff about, how your employees help raise rabbits on the weekend, or just completely trying to pick something nobody would ever say. I would keep it short. I would keep it punchy, and I would just put in what actually matters to give a sense of how the company did and where the company is, because the proxy statement isn't really about this per se. And I think folks have been using that section especially as sort of a, sort of almost a marketing tool, and I think that's going to be pulled back, personally.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really helpful. But ensure consistency among you use multiple vehicles to tell your story. Ensure consistency, and
crucial. You can't be having the lawyers doing the 10K and IR doing the proxy, and God knows who's doing the website. Really needs to be unified.
Yeah, okay. So shifting gears significantly from the realm of diversity and human capital, though there's clearly a linkage, as we all know, between the social issues and environmental issues. Francesca, at the outset, climate change really dominated the discussion with investors last year. What are you expecting to see in 2021 in terms of shareholder proposals? What areas beyond carbon neutrality do you think are going to be a focus?
Yeah, so I mean, 2021 started in kind of an exciting way, in the sense of there was a shareholder proposal that passed at P&G related to deforestation, and I think it was somewhat unexpected. And I'm not, it's a little early to tell whether that is an indicator of what's to come, or whether it was a one-off, but I do think it's something to watch closely. Both ISS and Glass Lewis supported that proposal, but interestingly, whereas I think in the past we probably would have expected BlackRock not to support it, they did support it. And we've seen some statements by BlackRock after that indicating that they will be more likely to support environmental proposals. So I would watch out for that. I think it's, in part there's been a little bit of push about how strong some of BlackRock's statements have been around this area and whether the voting record really supports that. And I think that, they're obviously what they come out with in terms of their position has a dual purpose, both driving change and then also on the back end responding to proposals as well. But I think that's an important area to look at. In terms of the substantive areas, and I'll be brief because we've chatted kind of around environment a little bit already. I think emissions, the Paris Accord, other environmental proposals like deforestation, supply chain dynamics and how that's impacts the environment, and then sustainability frameworks. So the thing I'd mention is that with this with the Biden administration, I think that you will see an enhanced focus on ESG and on potentially on ESG disclosure that's a bit more prescriptive. So while that may not drive proxy season, I think it might be an interesting overlay that could influence some of what goes on.
Thanks. Turning quickly to compensation. So Mary, I know this area is near and dear to your heart. So what do you see happening with, say, on pay votes in 2021, and how are companies grappling with the new median CEO compensation calculations they're going to?
Well, I think that a lot of companies are sort of hoping that the 2020 votes on these things are going to be sort of asterisked in the record books as COVID impaired, because I think as far as the pay ratio, people do have to find a new median this year, if depending on whether they've used the same employee or not. But I think it is going to be thrown off a little bit, at least for the companies who did a lot of furloughs and pay cuts and pay restorations. It's going to be more difficult this year than I think it has been for others. On the say on pay, I think the companies that did either grant discretionary bonuses or adjusted performance goals or did something like that, totally justifiable, but you got to justify it. My one big call out on this is it might be painful, but you should really be as transparent as possible on what you did to your compensation in light of just the uproar. I mean, the pandemic, the election, the wildfires, the racial protests, and if it impacted your comp, just suck it up and then explain how it did.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So let me do a really quick, actually, let me do the CLE credit one more time. That's 1, 2, 3, 6, 6. And now a really lightning round. Rory, what's the most important piece of advice you give a company right now in preparing for the 2021?
Just, I think, be prepared. Be proactive wherever you can. I mean, much better not to be in defensive. Much better to understand kind of where your company is going to be focused on. And I think someone made the comment about how if you've got issues, face up to them and get ahead of how you present them. Don't necessarily try and gloss over, because people are pretty good these days at kind of, I think Mary made a point about checking kind of various inputs. Yet understand the reality and be proactive about it.
Great, yeah, and it's all part of the era of sustained transparency that companies actually haven't necessarily been accustomed to. Mary,
I gave my big shout out. Transparency, transparency, transparency.
Okay. I didn't know. I gave you a second chance. You're not on mute. All right, you gave yours on comp. Francesca, your one big piece of advice.
Sure. I mean, I would say engagement. I think that there's a lot going on out there, and COVID obviously dominated a lot of last season, but is not gone, and as Rory mentioned, is going to continue to be an important kind of aspect of how everyone runs their business. And so, the ability to engage more frequently on more issues, I think, is something that companies should take advantage of and really focus on in the coming year, whether it's diversity or climate. I think those are going to be very important issues, and the opportunity to engage about what the company is doing on that front is
and I think picking up on both of those, whether it's in preparation or engagement, really involve your board, right? They are going to be very important to the story that you were telling. This is not just something for Scribners to be doing off on the side here, right? So anyway, so with that, I want to thank our panelists today for just terrific insights on the topic of the upcoming 2021 proxy season. I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to also highlight some recent reports and other resources available to you. We recently released reports on CEO succession, on executive compensation practices, and on how investors are viewing companies taking action on social issues. Those are 3 great reports. We've got another one coming out soon, as I mentioned, on human capital management and disclosures. We've got some webcasts. If you enjoyed this one, you may want to tune in to get these on demand. We had a couple on human capital management, on the board's role, on disclosure. We had one on executive compensation in a time of crisis. And, we also have this report that's come out, not from us, but from Doug Cha and others, on virtual shareholder meetings. So he's a friend of the center. He's an ESG Center fellow. And if you want to delve more deeply into the world of virtual shareholder meetings, I'd recommend that you review that report. And then finally, please do complete the evaluation form for this webcast. And with that, I just want to wish everyone a very safe, very healthy, and happy holiday season. And here's to a calmer and more peaceful and prosperous new year. Thank you, everyone.